Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Rachel Alters, and we're going to discuss today, can I collect long-term disability insurance benefits and workers' compensation benefits? And Rachel, this is an issue that we deal with on a lot of our cases because of the fact that many people who are disabled get injured on the job.
Right.
And then they are forced to file a workers' comp claim, and then there's this finger pointing back and forth between long-term disability and workers' comp saying, no, it wasn't work-related, yes, it was work-related, and if it is work-related, then the workers' comp becomes primary under most state laws, and the disability insurance benefits are secondary. Now, we are not workers' comp attorneys, and we certainly refer those issues out to workers' comp lawyers all over the country, and we're happy to make that referral if someone needs that. But there is an overlap between the long-term disability insurance, and the important thing here, the reason we're going to discuss these issues today, is that the long-term disability insurance is often going to last a lot longer than the workers' compensation will, because in some states there's set periods of time for how long it's going to last. It can be difficult to get the workers' comp, you can get a settlement, all of those issues. So right off the bat, let's talk about this set-off issue, because many times, unfortunately, people are either misled or ignore the long-term disability insurance, fail to file a claim timely, and only go for the workers' comp, and then they call us 2-3 years later and go, oh, I'm done with my workers' comp, I want to get long-term disability insurance now.
Right.
Why would that be potentially not an option for them if they do that?
Right. Well, it depends if they're still working for the same employer or they're not. So if they're still working for the same employer and they want to file a new claim, it usually isn't an issue. But if you're, for example, a nurse who got hurt on the job at the hospital and filed a workers' comp claim and was seeing the workers' comp physicians and they declared her disabled under workers' comp, that she can't work because of her injury at work, and then she no longer works at that hospital, she won't be covered under the insurance policy anymore. So then they run into a situation of, well, what do you mean I had coverage? Well, it's been 2 to 3 years, and there's very unlikely that an insurance carrier is going to take an application, accept, and review a claim that's 2 to 3 years old when you're no longer working for that employer.
Right, and then obviously talk about the notice of claim requirements as
Right.
well, that if you don't, what is usually, how often do you have to give the disability carrier notice of claim, even though you might think I have a workers' comp claim, so why did I have to tell you?
Right, so the carrier has no idea that you had a workers' comp claim. Even
Right.
if it's the same carrier,
Right.
it's a different department, so they have no idea. So usually they have a 30-day notice requirement. That means within 30 days of your injury or illness, you're supposed to notify the insurance carrier that this is going on. Then you have 90 days to provide proof of loss, which is to give them the proof that, the claim forms, the medical records. And then there's usually some clause in there that says, but no longer than a year, if you're not able to. So if you were sick and in the hospital or unable to get the claim forms together, or you had some sort of medical reason, it usually will allow, but no longer than a year. So if you're 2-3 years out, most of the carriers are going to say, sorry, Charlie, we're not going to accept this claim. If you're still working at the same employer, then it's a little different issue. They probably won't want to backdate it to the date of your injury. But if you're still disabled and have the same issues, you may be able to file a new claim. But it's better to do it all together.
Right, so the tip here is that if you filed a workers' comp claim and you think you're going to have long-term disability, you should notify the carrier in a timely manner so that you don't waive that particular claim. And then the 30, 90-day notice is whether it's from the date of injury or possibly after the elimination period, because if you have, most of these policies have a 90-day or 180 days that you have to be unable to work before you're eligible.
Right.
And I always find it kind of weird to tell a carrier 30 days from an injury that I'm going to file a claim when you have to be eligible for, you have to be out of work for at least 90 days. Well, what happens if you get better on day 89?
Right.
You don't know that you're going to be out 90 days or 180 days. So there's some wiggle room there, but always better safe than sorry. And you can certainly call us and discuss with us when the notice should be put in. So that's the first thing important. Definitely put the long-term disability carrier on notice.
Right.
Let's talk about, though, how I mentioned earlier how workers' comp is primary usually to the long-term disability insurance. So let's talk about in terms of numbers, Rachel. If someone's getting $3,000 a month from workers' comp and they have $4,000 a month they qualify for in long-term disability insurance,
Right.
then you know that the long-term disability carriers are always going to offset any other compensation that you get from workers' comp for lost wages specifically.
Right.
So in my example, $4,000 long-term disability benefit, $3,000 workers' comp, you're left with $1,000 because the disability carrier is going to say, you got 3 from workers' comp, we're only giving you the difference.
Right.
And that will continue for as long as the claimant has the workers' compensation benefit.
Right.
So very important to understand that offset. And often the workers' comp could exceed the long-term disability, but a lot of these policies have a minimum benefit of $100. And many people think, well, for $100, I don't want to be bothered. But they shouldn't have that attitude, because what happens when the workers' comp stops, and now that $3,000 workers' comp that was offsetting the long-term disability would kick back in because
Right.
it picks up later. So don't
Right.
neglect the long-term disability insurance because you think it's only $100, because as you said earlier, you can't bring the claim back 2-3 years later.
Right.
All right. Talk about this issue that comes up a lot. People call you and they go, I got a workers' comp settlement, or I'm negotiating one now.
Right.
Talk about some ways that you can strategically structure the workers' comp settlement and maximize your long-term disability benefits.
Sure. And in every long-term disability group policy, there is a section that talks about other income. And in that other income section is, always states if you receive a workers' comp benefit, whether it's monthly or a lump sum, that's an offset to your disability benefits, which if you're getting a large amount, if you get a big lump sum, that could affect your long-term disability benefits greatly. So I always say to them, if they're in the middle of negotiations, please explain to your attorney. It's very important to make sure that in the negotiations, in the lump sum release, that you divide up what you're getting the benefits for. So a certain portion of the workers' comp settlement can be for medical bills, which a lot of it is. And then another portion could be for lost wages. So if they don't divide that up and they settle it for a lump of $100,000, the insurance carrier is going to run with that and say, okay, now we have a $100,000 offset, which could really affect the value of a disability claim. So I try and make sure that I would communicate with that workers' comp lawyer directly, or if the claimant wants to do it on their own, it's very important that it's set out and split up in their settlement agreement, that there's only a portion of it that's allocated to the lost wages, so that we can make their Social Security, their disability claim worth as much as possible. And then once that lump sum is settled and they're done with workers' comp, and we figure out what the allocation is, we can go on with the long-term disability claim, and hopefully then they'll have as much of their benefit as they can have going forward. So it's really important.
Right, and we work with workers' compensation lawyers all over the country to help them structure these settlements so that their claimants can maximize their long-term disability benefits. So we encourage, if you're a workers' comp lawyer, feel free to call us and we'll give you some guidance as to how you should structure the workers' comp settlement to maximize those long-term disability benefits. The other issue, Rachel, I want to talk about, we deal with this all the time. Workers' comp doctors are different in the sense of your regular treating doctors, because you're made to go to that doctor.
Right.
Basically, like you had an injury and they go, this is the workers' comp doctor, and the workers' comp insurance company says you have to see this particular doctor, and basically we're going to go by what this doctor says. If this doctor supports your workers' comp claim, then great. If not, you're screwed. Go through the appeal process.
Right.
And the workers' comp doctors have certain thresholds and standards that are going to be oftentimes different than what the long-term disability policy may say. And especially when you have this own occupation definition of disability, which is standard in the first 24 months of a policy, which means you can't do the duties of your job, which is usually consistent with what the workers' comp threshold is.
Right.
And then you switch to this unable to do any gainful occupation, which is where we see a lot of problems. And why does that come up, in your opinion, when you have a person who's with workers' comp doctors and then has a change of definition to any occupation?
Right, because a workers' comp doctor is essentially just looking at your occupation as you're working it at your place of business. So they're trying to determine whether or not you're capable of working at your job. Well, that only is good for 24 months. After 24 months, it's whether you could do any gainful occupation under the terms of the long-term disability policy, and a workers' comp doctor isn't looking at that. They're looking at the specific duties of your job. So if you're beyond, and you're still in a workers' comp claim and you're beyond that definition, the workers' comp doctor is not going to be helpful at all in getting you approved for that any gainful occupation definition. You're going to have to rely on your own treating doctors. So that's what I tell everybody. It's so important not only to treat with the workers' comp doctors all along, but to make sure you have your own personal physicians who have documented your issues, are treating you for your problems, writing down your restrictions and limitations, and that they are also aware that there's going to be a change of definition in your insurance policy, because these workers' comp doctors have one job only, and that's to determine whether you can work in your own job. And then when you reach maximum medical improvement, you're done, and they're going to say, okay, you can go back to work at your own job, but or they say you're not able to do your own job. But if you're not, that still doesn't get you approved after 24 months in the long-term disability policies. So it's very important that they work with their own doctors at the same time to make sure that that's documented.
Right, and every now and then you can get a good workers' compensation doctor. Because look,
Right.
there's some doctors that just do workers' comp claims, but there's many doctors who have a full general practice, an auto accident practice, a
Right.
disability clients, social security clients, and they just happen to see workers' comp clients. And that could be a great doctor, and you may be okay with that. But more often than not, you gotta have that conversation with the workers' compensation doctor. Be like, look, I have a long-term disability claim as well. It's a different standard than what's going on here for workers' comp. Are you able to support me?
Right.
And if the doctor's like, well, I don't want to get involved with that, or I don't know, or just go see some, you need to know, because it's going to put you in
Right.
a big problem that can result in a claim denial, and
Sure.
you want to plan ahead for that. And if you're in that situation, we always work with claimants to help them, guide them to appropriate doctors as well that might be outside. Now, the issue that comes up, Rachel, is people say, well, I only have workers' comp. I don't have health insurance.
Right.
I don't know how to pay for the doctor. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to invest in your claim, whether it's a consult, an independent medical exam, a functional capacity exam. There's lots of different options that are available to you, but it may require a slight investment on behalf of the claimant
Sure.
in order to get there. But sometimes you have to spend money to get money, and there's nothing you can do about that, but we're trying to give you some guidance here to avoid a potential claim denial. So, we started with, can you collect workers' comp and long-term disability? The answer is yes, and lots of different things to consider so that it continues, because workers' comp will be short-lived, and long-term disability should continue for as long as the claimant needs it. So
Right.
what I recommend is that if you are a claimant who has a workers' comp claim and long-term disability as well, feel free to reach out to Rachel or myself. We'll provide you with an immediate free consultation. You can reach us by calling our number below or submitting a free consultation request on our website. We also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We regularly provide videos such as this where we talk about medical conditions, specific insurance companies, different occupational issues all things that will help you be aware of the disability insurance claims process. And the better educated you are, the better position you're going to be in to get your benefits approved and keep them from being denied in the future. So we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you, and we'll be here in the future should you need us.